I'm very proud of African American unemployment stands at the lowest rate ever recorded.
It got to a point where I really didn't even want to look too much during the speech over to that side, because honestly, it was bad energy. No, it was bad energy. You're up there, you've got half the room going totally crazy, wild. They loved everything. They want to do something great for our country. And you have the other side, even on positive news, really positive news like that, they were like death and un-American. Un-American. Somebody said treasonous. I mean, yeah, I guess why not? You know. Can we call that treason? Why not? I mean, they certainly didn't seem to love our country very much. But you look at that, and it's really very, very sad. We're one team, one people, and one family, and we're saluting one great American flag. And everybody stood up yesterday. There was nobody kneeling at the beginning of the Super Bowl. We've made a lot of improvement, haven't we? That's a big improvement. And on top of that, it was a good game. So a lot of good things happened. But there was no kneeling before that Super Bowl.
Umbrella. She's up. Whole nother level of shit you can't even understand.
What is good, my people? We are live back again with another episode of The Forecast. So out in LA, a 16-year-old brother by the name of Anthony Weber was shot by LAPD several times and killed. So let's go back and see how this 16-year-old brother can make the police fear for their lives and leave them with no other choice but to shoot him.
Tensions are very high in South Los Angeles this morning.
And that's where a deputy-involved shooting ended in the death of a 16-year-old boy. CBS 2's Jasmine Veal is live on 107th Street with details. Jasmine?
Yeah, Jeff and Sharon, right behind me, this is where that 16-year-old boy was shot and killed by sheriff deputies in the doorway of that apartment building where you now see some candles have been placed. They said he had a gun, even though no weapon has been found, and tensions escalated between deputies and this community last night.
He's laying on his back.
And one woman there heard screaming her son is dead. Emotions were running very high. Another man detained after yelling and facing off with those deputies. This was the chaotic scene hours after the 16-year-old was shot and killed. Now, the sheriff's department says they got a call that a teenager was pointing a gun at a driver in this area around 8 p.m. Well, when deputies arrived, they spotted the 16-year-old matching that description and said that they also saw a handgun tucked into his pants. Well, they began to chase him down the street, 107th. Well, investigators say he turned around at one point, and that's when deputies shot him multiple times. It's unclear if he was actually ever pointing a gun at them, but neighbors say they do not believe he ever had a weapon because they only heard deputies fire.
The gunshots were so loud, it felt as if someone was banging on my door. And 8 to 9 loud, very murderous, direct shots. Bah, 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 bah. Very, very, it was terrible. It was terrible. And this kid was murdered without a trial. And this could have been me.
And a lot of these neighbors, Jeff and Sharon, also very upset because they said the 16-year-old's body was laying there for hours uncovered in plain sight for everyone to see. Again, no weapon has been found. The 16-year-old boy shot and killed by sheriff deputies. Multiple independent investigations are underway, including with the DA's office and the Office of the Inspector General.
So the LAPD says they got a call from somebody to report that somebody was pointing a gun at their car and he thought he was going to get shot. Now, if you'll pay attention, you'll notice that when the police have something that benefits them, they'll release it right away. They have no problem. Like in this case, they actually released parts of the 911 call, which the police rarely do. But when it benefits them, they have no problem putting it out.
A question tonight's around the death of a teenage father in South LA. Deputies say they had to open fire, killing him. CBS 2's Tom Waite shows us his mother and neighbors have a different story.
The sheriff's department says they tried to end this peacefully, but the 16-year-old turned on them with a weapon. His mother and other witnesses say that is simply not true. Anthony Weber's photos are mounted in the courtyard near the spot where he was shot and killed. The 16-year-old, who was the father of a 9-month-old baby, was gunned down by LA County Sheriff's deputies. Weber's mother says her son was an innocent victim.
That my son was a good son. He was a great brother. He had the biggest heart. He was a wonderful father. He has a 9-month-old daughter, Violet, that lights up every time he walked in the room.
Weber was shot after deputies came here to 107th and Budlong after they received a 911 call about a man pointing a gun at someone. The sheriff released a recording of the call. The caller's voice is disguised.
And he came out with his gun pointed off.
What kind of gun was it?
I just know it was a handgun.
What color?
Black.
When deputies got to the scene, they say they confronted Weber, who matched the description given by the 911 caller. They say Weber ignored their commands and was armed. And during a foot chase, they say he turned toward them. Deputies opened fire. After the shooting, no weapon was found.
Deputies saw a gun when the shooting occurred, and then with the 30 to 40 people that came out of the apartment complex, they were trying to maintain security of that, and they believe that at some point somebody reached in and may have taken the gun.
People who say they saw the shooting tell us Weber was unarmed.
You think he had no shirt on, so you could clearly see his waist?
He didn't deserve this. He don't have that kind of heart.
Sheriff's investigators say the 16-year-old was also a known gang member. As for the investigation into how this all unfolded, it remains ongoing.
So the LAPD said when they got there, they saw Anthony and he fit the description, which was a black man wearing a black t-shirt and jeans. Now, I don't know how many black men were wearing black t-shirts and jeans in LA at the time, but they saw Anthony first. But according to witnesses and the people who were with Anthony Weber at the time, they said he didn't even have a shirt on, so he didn't even fit the description. Now, the police said he did have a shirt on, and the paramedics cut it off after they shot him. But he fit the description, so they approached him and they told him to stop, but they claimed he took off running. Police Captain Chris Bergner said they saw a gun tucked in his waistband. The LAPD said he ran into an apartment complex courtyard and then he turned around and grabbed at his waistband. And that, of course, forced the police to shoot at him 10 times. They didn't say how many times he was hit, but he was hit at least several times. Now, the police said they found one witness to back up their story. Now, they never showed this witness. It probably was another cop who was at the scene. But every witness that you do see contradicts the police story.
A South LA teen is shot dead by sheriff's deputies. The department says he was a known gang member with a gun. People in the neighborhood tell a completely different story. CBS 2's Dave Lopez is live with both sides of the story. Dave.
Pat, about the only thing that the people who were there and the deputies agree on is that this 16-year-old was shot and killed by deputies. Now, as you just said, the deputy said he had a gun and that he was apparently going for it when he was shot. People who know him and people who said they were there tell a much different version, that he didn't have a gun, he didn't even have a shirt on.
The deputies saw a gun when the shooting occurred, and then with the 30 to 40 people that came out of the apartment complex, they were trying to maintain security of that, and they believe that at some point somebody reached in and may have taken the gun.
And detectives say that's why a gun wasn't found at the scene. The scene last night, just outside the apartment unit in the 1200 block of 107th Street, where deputies were involved in a shooting. Dead, a 16-year-old, identified by friends and the coroner's office as A.J. Weber. Everyone in this neighborhood calls him AJ.
Yeah, I heard him say freeze, yeah.
The cop said freeze.
They say freeze,
And then what AJ do then?
He just turned. He turned right. He didn't know cops was in there.
He told me his name is Terry. He said he and AJ had just watched the Super Bowl. AJ, he said, didn't have on a shirt. They were smoking on the sidewalk when AJ said, I'm a little cold. I'm going to go to the apartment just up the street and get my sweatshirt.
If I take my shirt off right here, could you see something concealed? Nah, you can't. There's no way in hell. Yeah, he had no shirt on.
And Terry insisted AJ did not have a gun. And he said without a shirt on, there's no way he could even hide a gun.
He had no shirt on, so you could clearly see his waist.
Is he a good kid?
I mean, he had a juvenile background, but it wasn't bad. Like, he's been off probation for a year. He's been doing good. He has a little girl.
I saw the police shoot at him for no reason.
You said they were going in there because they had a search warrant?
Yes, they had a search warrant. I didn't know what was going on and stuff, but they were like stepped to the side and they just started shooting at him.
Oh, what did they tell you they had a search warrant for?
They didn't give me no information. All they said was that they had a search warrant to go in and check out the place.
The subject, who we can't identify due to his age, is known as a local gang member in the area.
A picture of AJ with his daughter is at the memorial, the scene where he died. All of this, the candles, the whiskey bottles, the loud music, that's all a tribute to AJ. I am told that he ran into somewhere in this area. The deputies were already here. Now, someone says one of the deputies yelled out, "Freeze." This is their story. AJ then turned without a shirt, and as he turned, that's when they opened fire. That's how one man describes what he heard. As for being shirtless,
I can tell you it's not true. He did have a shirt on, and it was cut away by medical aid that was being rendered to him.
now detectives say they were in that area in the first place because of a 911 call from a man in a car who said that someone pointed a gun at him.
Now, even though no gun was ever found, the police captain claims that about 30 or 40 people came outside when they heard the shooting, and somebody came and just took the gun off of his body. Now, I don't know what kind of police wouldn't secure a gun when there's like 30 or 40 people outside, but they just left his body and the gun unguarded. Now, even though there is supposed to be an investigation going on, the police are already defending each other. They are already justifying this murder.
Do you understand that there are things that we're 3 days into this investigation? 3 days into this investigation.
Now at 10, tensions boiled over tonight at a sheriff's meeting to discuss the shooting death of a 16-year-old. Anthony Weber was shot and killed by LA County Sheriff's deputies during a foot chase Sunday night. KCAL 9's Tom Waite is live at the Hall of Justice to show us why things got so heated there. Tom?
And Andrea, as you can see in that little bit of video, it was a very intense meeting. The family of this 16-year-old says the bottom line is this shooting was not justified, but the sheriff's department is trying to plead their case. Tempers flare as chaos overwhelms an emergency meeting of the Sheriff's Civilian Oversight Commission. The panel assembled at a church in South LA to discuss the shooting death of 16-year-old Anthony Weber, who was killed by an LA County Sheriff's deputy during a foot chase Sunday night. A representative from the Sheriff's Department gave the deputy's version of events.
The individual was seen reaching back for the waistband where the deputy last saw the handgun, and when he went to the ground after the shooting occurred, approximately 30 to 40 people came from down within the apartment complex towards the two deputies.
Members of Weber's family spoke out in the teen's defense.
Y'all killed my brother. What you think we should get for that? Ain't no money can't replace my brother.
I don't believe there is.
The shooting unfolded Sunday night at an apartment complex near the intersection of 107th and Budlong. Deputies were called to the area because of a report of a man with a gun. Deputies arrived on scene. They found Weber, who they say matched the description of the gunman. When they confronted him, they claim Weber ran and turned toward them, and deputies say he had a gun. A deputy opened fire, killing Weber. No weapon was found on Weber. Sheriff's investigators say someone in the crowd that gathered after the shooting took the gun from the scene, a claim rejected by those gathered here tonight.
At the end of the day, this is a very complex investigation, and the investigation is not going to... All right. So...
And the deputies involved in this shooting are on paid leave, which is routine during an investigation like this one.
Now, of course, the LAPD doesn't have any body camera footage. They don't have any evidence. All of the witnesses contradict their story, except for the one witness that we haven't heard from. And of course, they use his past to justify this. This kid was 16 years old. He doesn't have that much of a past to use. And I'm not saying he was perfect, but to justify shooting a 16-year-old kid with all the evidence against you, especially if we start to look at some of these police officers' history, It's a little hard to say, look at this 16-year-old kid's history as a reason to justify killing him. But this is no surprise. We know there's a history of criminalizing black boys. They have no problem telling you, well, this kid was in a street gang. But they will never tell you that the police is the gang that bullies the street gangs. We march and we protest. But in 1944, a 14-year-old boy named George Stinney Jr., he was just a 90-pound, 14-year-old kid who was accused of killing 2 white girls and dumping their body into the lake.
95 pounds, he was just a skinny little teenager, only 14 years old, growing up in the town of Alkaloo, South Carolina, back in 1944. George Stinney Jr. was tending to the family's cow with his little sister in this field near an old set of railroad tracks when they crossed paths with 2 young white girls looking for flowers. George's sister remembers it clearly.
They said, "Could you tell us where we could find some maypops?" We said no. And they went on about their business.
They were the last known to see the girls alive. A coroner's report at the time describes a vicious murder. 11-year-old Betty June Binnicker and 7-year-old Mary Emma Thames were beaten to death. Multiple severe head injuries suggested the killer used a hammer. The Stinney family fled in fear after police came for little George.
They were looking for somebody to blame it on. So they used my brother as a scapegoat.
The motive was attempted rape. And in a dizzying rush to judgment, George Stinney's trial reportedly took just 3 hours. The all-white jury deliberated just 10 minutes before the judge sent him to the electric chair. His defense attorney called no witnesses and filed no appeal. With attorneys representing the Stinney family today, I went back to where that tragic encounter happened to find the railroad tracks rusted, covered in kudzu, and the field littered with painful memories. A rush to judgment I can almost understand, but why was there no appeal?
George Stinney needed to be dead soon. George Stinney sitting in jail for a year would have been an incredible difference in the facts and circumstances of this case. And I think in that way, they swept it completely under the rug.
In spite of a confession police say they got from Stinney, family attorneys say a new examination of the few records that still exist shows a botched investigation. Stinney's alibi, his little sister, was never questioned. There was no evidence of attempted rape, no evidence of blood on Stinney's clothing, and no murder weapon consistent with the wounds found on the girls. What is left seems like an almost impossible story, that little George Stinney was somehow able to murder both of these little girls, beat them to death without a struggle, then carry both of their bodies and their bicycle about 300 yards that way to hide them in a ditch. 70 years later, the Stinney family asked a South Carolina court to throw out George's conviction. All of the authorities from that era are gone, along with most of the court records. Surviving relatives of the murdered girls continue to believe in Stinney's guilt and question his family's timing.
I have sympathy for the parents and the sisters and the brother. I feel like that they know that he did it. And that's why they never have revisited the grave. They never have put a headstone there, a footstone. And they never talked about it.
If we had allowed a stone to be there and someone found out where my brother was, they probably would have dug his grave up and throw him to the wolves. Even if you think I'm wrong, my brother did not do it. And I hate no man.
In the end, the Stinney family got what they were looking for. The judge agreed young George's rights had been violated and threw out his conviction. Described by his family as bright and talented, George Stinney wanted to be an artist when he grew up, daring to dream beyond the limitations of life in the segregationist South. Instead, his name will be forever linked to a tragic story of Jim Crow-era injustice.
Now, they didn't have any evidence against George Stinney. They didn't have any witnesses. They didn't have any weapon. They didn't find any blood. They didn't find any evidence of rape. They didn't find any evidence at all. The police claimed that George had confessed, not that he had a lawyer to do so. And even if he could have a lawyer, he could only have a racist white lawyer. But there wasn't any evidence that he confessed either, besides what the police claimed. George Stinney Jr. himself said he didn't confess, which his cellmate came out 70 years later and said. But at his trial, which only took 3 hours, George Stinney's lawyer, his defense attorney, who was running for state office at the time and trying to appeal to a white demographic in South Carolina, he didn't call any witnesses, he didn't ask any questions, and even though a 14-year-old kid was sentenced to death without any evidence, he didn't even file for an appeal. George Stinney's family wasn't even allowed into the courtroom. It was 1944 and still segregation, and blacks weren't allowed. His family actually did get to see him one time from the time he was arrested to the time he was put to death. But it only took an all-white jury 10 minutes to convict him and sentence him to the electric chair. His family even tried to appeal themselves, but Governor Olin Johnson said George had killed the smaller girl to rape the older girl, then he killed her and raped the dead body. He said 20 minutes later he tried to rape it again, but the body was too cold. Now, mind you, they didn't have any evidence for any of this. They claimed it was from the so-called confession, but they executed George Stinney as fast as they could. He was so small he didn't even fit in the electric chair, and they made him sit on his Bible just so he could fit in the electric chair. Then in 2014, 70 years after he was murdered, a judge finally vacated him of his murder charges. They didn't clear him, just vacated him of the charges, saying that giving a 14-year-old the death penalty was cruel and unusual punishment and a violation of his rights, even though at the time they did not have civil rights. But 70 years later, they can admit his 8th Amendment rights were violated.
I don't have a murder weapon. I don't have bloody clothes. I don't have a written confession. I have nothing. And we don't know whether or not he did it, but that wasn't the issue. It was whether or not his constitutional rights were preserved, and they weren't, and that was clear. And the further I got into it, the more I saw just how obvious and blatant it was that he wasn't afforded his constitutional protections.
Judge Carmen Mullen is now a permanent part of our state's history that dates back to a time when the color of your skin was more likely to determine your guilt or innocence. It happened to thousands, and it happened to George Stinney Jr.
One of the most shocking things in the George Stinney case is he was tried by a jury of 12 white men. That certainly is not a jury of his peers. That's certainly not a cross-section of Clarendon County at the time, which was half African-American, half white. And here we have an all-white jury with his family not being even allowed into the courtroom.
These train tracks divide the small community of Alkaloo, and 7 decades later, the town is still split over whether or not George Stinney Jr. was responsible for those murders.
The little boy would graze his cows here, during the day and come get them in the afternoon.
I talked with a local landowner who did not want to go on camera, but he told me that his grandfather owned the field where 11-year-old Betty Binnicker and 7-year-old Emma Thames were killed in 1944. That land has been passed on to him, along with stories of George Stinney's guilt.
People in this county and the town of Alkaloo were 99.9% certain that they had the right person.
George Stinney was only 14 years old. He weighed less than 100 pounds and was 5'1" when he was accused of the murders. It took jurors 10 minutes to convict him, and 3 months after his trial, he was taken from Clarendon County to Columbia and executed in the electric chair. When he left death row, he walked down a hall carrying a Bible under his arm. Newspapers at the time say he used that Bible as a booster seat because he was too small for the chair designed to execute men.
There was no real investigation done by the police. It was just assumed that either George Stinney or George Stinney and his brother committed this offense. It's got to be fair. It's got to be just, or it can't be relied upon. And when people have distrust of the system, then obviously we have complete breakdown of social order.
And even though he was the youngest person to ever be put to death, to receive capital punishment, with no evidence against him, those two little girls' families still feel like that was justified, what happened to this 14-year-old kid. There was somebody who even confessed to the murders on their deathbed, a white man who had a history of hurting children. And according to the story, one of their family members was on this lynch mob looking for this 14-year-old kid, George Stinney. But the family and half of this town still justifies it. If something happens to one of their children, they solve that issue right away. George Stinney Jr. was put to death in 1944. Anthony Weber, a 16-year-old kid, was shot right after the Super Bowl. No evidence, cops still investigating themselves. We are still subject to their laws and their penalties, and they are not subject to ours. At some point, we're going to have to start responding with the same urgency that they have to maintain their position, or else this will continue to happen to our children.
Anger over a third deputy-involved shooting this week.
And this time, LA County Sheriff's deputies shot and killed a man in East LA. They say he got in one of their patrol cars and tried to run them down.
CBS 2's Dave Lopez is live in South LA, where an emergency town hall meeting is about to begin. Dave?
Well, the name of this church is the New Congregational Baptist Church on 112th and Vermont, and in just about a half hour from now, this room is expected to be filled. They are going to have a meeting here, an old-fashioned town hall meeting, to air out the complaints, air out the differences. The three shootings that have taken place all have different circumstances, but the one that has touched the nerve in this community is the one that involved a 16-year-old boy. A bullet-riddled sheriff's squad car. Detectives say a man tried to steal that car, drove toward a deputy who opened fire, hitting and killing the man. Also, a man, described as a gang member, approaches a deputy, something in his hand. He is shot and wounded. And a 16-year-old, deputy said he was armed, is shot and killed in a deputy-involved shooting. 3 shootings since Sunday night. Of the 3 shootings, by far the most controversial, the shooting death of A.J. Weber, the 16-year-old, father of a 9-month-old baby, from South LA.
He has a 9-month-old daughter, Violet, that lights up every time he walked in the room.
Comments from his heartbroken mother. And this from people who are simply angry over what happened.
We tired of being tired. So we got to sit down and we got to air it out.
And that's exactly what's going to happen tonight. A town hall meeting in South LA called for by the Sheriff's Civilian Oversight Commission, and it will be attended by top brass of the Sheriff's Department. Tonight's meeting, you're hoping the number one thing to accomplish is what?
Honesty and transparency. We will answer questions as best we can tonight, understanding that this is a multi-layered approach.
Meaning there are 3 separate investigations looking into the shooting death of A.J. Weber. Chief Joseph Gooden said the angry crowd that gathered right after the shooting was dispersed in an hour. And he said it doesn't represent the feelings of the entire community.
I can say that is just a small percentage of folks at that moment in time, and rightfully so, because they don't know the facts. They were upset.
Detectives say the 16-year-old had a gun, but no gun was found. Where'd it go? The theory from detectives is that someone from the angry crowd took it.
Those are the facts. Those facts could change, and to change to what degree at this moment in time, we just don't know.
Tonight you're expecting a calm, cool heads to prevail.
That's my hope.
Well, the commission and the sheriff's brass obviously does not expect any miracle cures here tonight. They just want to be able to lay out the facts, address the people, and give them a chance to respond in an open forum, hopefully in a quiet, dignified way.
The 16-year-old worked part-time right here at this recycling center. His father owns it, and that father says his son did not have a gun on him the night he was shot and killed. It didn't take long for John Weber to show us his family, 10 children all together, including 16-year-old Anthony, or AJ, as his mom called him.
Want to know, what's going on, and that's all.
On Sunday, the LA County Sheriff's Department says AJ was in known gang territory, and he was the teenager waving a gun at a passing motorist.
The subject ignored deputies' commands and ran from the apartment complex.
The Sheriff's Department goes on to say someone heard deputies yell at the younger Weber not to move.
Witnesses saw the deputies run after the subject and then heard gunshots a few seconds later.
Deputies say AJ was gang affiliated, but this father who runs a recycling center and small market here in South LA says although his son was no angel and smoked weed,
he was not in a gang.
I'm looking for a fair and impartial investigation.
We spoke to AJ's mother last night at a vigil.
We asking that you touch the young folks on the streets, Father God.
She also wants to know why her son had to die.
He didn't deserve this. He don't have that kind of heart.
I texted him, and I told him that I told him good night, and that was it.
None of the deputies had body cameras on them and no weapon was recovered. But the sheriff's department says that a large crowd of about 30 to 40 people gathered around the deputies after the shooting, and someone could have taken the weapon then. An autopsy is pending.
In 1944, George Stinney Jr. was just 14 when a rush to judgment sent him to his death in South Carolina's electric chair. Convicted in the murders of two little white girls, Stinney's trial reportedly took just 3 hours. The all-white jury deliberated just 10 minutes. Now, 7 decades later, attorneys for the Stinney family ask for a new trial to clear his name.
George Stinney could not have committed these murders. I think George Stinney saw those children, but I don't think George Stinney was the last person to see those children.
The bodies of 11-year-old Betty June Binnicker and 7-year-old Mary Emma Thames were found in a ditch in the small town of Alcaloo. A coroner's report at the time described a brutal beating. Multiple severe head injuries suggested the killer used a blunt instrument about the size of a hammer. Family of the victims still believes Stinney was guilty.
They had no choice in how they died, and he did. And I think that justice was served according to the laws in 1944 when this happened.
In the few records that still exist, Stinney allegedly confessed, even told police where to find the murder weapon. During the trial, his attorney called no witnesses, asked no questions, and filed no appeal after the young boy was sentenced to death.
How did I know?
Today, Stinney's siblings testify the teen was innocent, with them the entire time.
And I want to clear the air. We are not allowed to go any place without my mother's permission. They were very strict with us. We could not go no place, nowhere.
And listening to the family on the stand today, they draw a picture of a case in which critical evidence seemed to be completely overlooked in this rush to judgment. They pointed out in a crime like this, there would have been a great deal of blood, and yet they found no blood anywhere on their brother's clothing. Don?
The obvious question, David, why did it take 70 years for this case to go back to court?
This was a very slow-moving thing, but it continued to build over the decades. At first, the family was afraid to speak out. They actually had to leave their home. The siblings were talking on the stand today about how they had to leave in fear that a mob might show up to do them all harm after their brother was arrested. So they left in fear and didn't talk about it for a while. But they continued to keep the conversation going, and it took decades for them to find people to listen, to be curious, and to actually start doing research on this. They actually came up with some potential witnesses to bolster their case, including one man who was the cellmate of their brother, who said the young man at the time said that he did not do this and that he was forced into a confession.
We lived right back close to Green Hill Baptist Church. We lived back there right close to it. And Ruth's sister, Violet Freeman, went home with me from school. And after we got through eating, we went down to the church to get some water because we had an open well. And Mama didn't like for us to drink that water. So we went down to the church to get some water to take back to the house. And we got to playing down there under an oak tree. And this black boy came down there pushing a tricycle, the foot on the back and holding the handles and pushing with the other foot. And he came up to us and he wanted to know what were we doing down there. I said, we came to get some water and we just got to playing down here. He said, well, if you don't get away from here and if you come back, I will kill you. That was the evening before the little Binnicker girl and Tim's girl went missing the next day.
And when you found out those girls went missing and you got charged with the crime, like what was your reaction?
I got real upset because I said that could have been my friend and I. And we knew those girls. We went to school together.
What do you remember about them?
Just that they were very sweet girls. That happened in 44. March, I was 8 in May. And I can't say that he killed him, but I firmly believe that he did because of the way he threatened us and the way he looked at us.
And did you know why he would make that kind of threat? And then did y'all say anything back to him when he did that? Or what did y'all do?
No, we got our water and went to the house because Mama could stand in the back door of our house and see us down there at the church when we'd go to get water. And she would watch out for us. And the next evening that those little girls went missing, Mama had the baby, which was my youngest brother. And she started down there to the church because she saw those little girls down there talking with the little black boy. So she started down there after she knew that he had threatened us. But somebody came up in the yard. So she turned around and went back to the house. And she always regretted that she didn't go on down there because she said maybe she could have kept those little girls from going.
There's a judge in Kentucky that I must applaud. This brother, an African-American sitting criminal courts judge, was having a trial in this courtroom of an African-American defendant charged with a crime. And the jury pool, after being paneled and chosen, and the jury was set in the box on 2 separate occasions for the same case, the juries were all white. So the judge decided to dismiss both juries, and he said that the jury should reflect the racial makeup of the city and the county in which the court sits, and that it's unconstitutional in his mind that an African-American should have to be judged by an all-white jury. But he's not the first to say that. That even was said by the Supreme Court once in America, that it is unconstitutional for an all-white jury to sit in judgment of another person of color because there is some biases there.
Okay, so what you're saying is what this judge is doing, which is basically reverse preemptive jury nullification, is fine, and that let's flip the table, shall we, for a minute? And I have many points to make about this. If we had a white judge with a white defendant and an all-black jury, can you imagine what would happen? The uproar from the Black Lives Matter movement and all the rest of them, if this had been a reverse situation. I mean, it's not right regardless. Justice should be blind. And hang on a minute. Jury pools are made up of registered voters. Whites tend to be more registered voters than African Americans. As well, whites make more up of a population, generally, than African Americans. I don't know the racial makeup of this town, but you cannot nullify a jury and think that white people cannot judge black people fairly.
No,
that's ridiculous.
That's not what happened, Ms. Box.
And that's actually racist.
There are cities where you have as high as 45% African American, then you still get all white juries. What this judge is saying is that the jury pool should not be chosen just from voter registration rolls. It should be chosen by driver's license also. That way we can begin to choose people that racially diversely make up the entire city and county what that court sits in. It is only fair and right, because what you said about a white guy being judged by all black jury, that has never happened in America. So we can get away from that. Okay, that's a fallacy.
But hang on a minute. But the point is still valid. You cannot say that a group of white people do not have the wherewithal to judge a black person fairly. This is the problem.
No, that's not what he said. He said an all-white jury.
This is the problem.
Is unfair.
This
and
is
it
the problem with the culture. We keep dividing instead of thinking of ways we can come together.
Box, wait a minute, Ms. Box. Did you white people say that when O.J. Simpson had an all-black jury?
That was called jury nullification.
He had an all-black jury, and they set that brother free.
He did not have an all-black jury.
Yes, he did.
No, he didn't.
He had all-black jury.
No, there was
One
not.
woman who was Hispanic and half black.
No,
he had an all-black
jury. As far as I remember, there were 3 whites or something.
No, there were not 3 whites on that jury.
And that would be called jury nullification, which this judge is trying to do in reverse preemptively.
And you still say O.J. guilty?
Kinda is. He cut off his wife's head practically.
He was found not guilty by a court.
And he's rotting in prison now, thank God.
Not for what he did, because of who he is.
All right, and we back on the forecast. So in the Bronx, a 66-year-old mentally ill woman named Deborah Danner was shot in her own home by NYPD. So let's see what could cause a cop to shoot a 66-year-old mentally ill woman inside of her own home.
Mayor de Blasio said bluntly today, Deborah Danner should be alive. Here is what we know about Danner. She was 66 and she suffered from mental illness. We also know that police have been called to her home in similar situations several times in the past, and that they knew that she suffered from mental illness.
Now, we're also learning more about the sergeant who fired the shots, 30-year-old Hugh Barry. Barry has been with the NYPD for 8 years. Eyewitness News reporter Kimberly Richardson joining us live from the Castle Hill section with new details in this case. Kimberly.
Well, Dave, friends tell me they'd often find Deborah Danner standing right here at the bus stop. They admit she was troubled, but say she wasn't dangerous. Police Commissioner James O'Neill didn't hesitate, saying the bottom line is police here ended up taking a life instead of preserving one.
She don't deserve to be dead.
Wallace Cook Jr. is talking about his cousin Deborah Danner, who since college wrestled with mental illness. Many here at her home on Pugsley Avenue knew the 66-year-old. She lived in a 7th-floor apartment, the same place where last night NYPD Sergeant Hugh Barry shot and killed her. Danner's sister lives in a neighboring building, was there when Danner was fatally wounded.
I was down the hall from my sister's apartment when I saw officers rush in and I heard 3 gunshots.
Police Commissioner James O'Neill did not mince words on the heels of this deadly shooting.
What is clear in this one instance, we failed. I want to know why it happened.
A neighbor called 911 just after 6 saying Danner was acting irrationally. Officials say Sergeant Barry saw the victim sitting on her bed holding scissors. He convinced her to drop them, but authorities maintain Danner then came at the officer with a baseball bat, took a swing at him. He fired 2 shots. Kirk has known Danner for years.
She had a bat. She take one swing, charge her, boom. Come on now. Taser, don't shoot her.
That very issue is now front and center in this case. Did the sergeant use proper protocol when dealing with an emotionally disturbed person?
So our policy is isolate and contain. So
What is isolate and contain?
if you have somebody in a certain area, time is on our side.
Danner was in her bedroom. The taser? Since last year, the department made it a point, retrained thousands of officers to use the non-lethal weapon. Sergeant Barry knew how to use a taser. Top brass want to know why he didn't. But a spokesperson for the Sergeants Benevolent Association says Officer Barry feared for his life as Danner grabbed that bat from behind her bed, ignored repeated orders to drop it, charged, then swung at the sergeant's head. But relatives point out police had been here before, knew Danner, that she was schizophrenic. Mayor de Blasio says point blank, Danner should be alive right now.
We did fail, and we need to say it out loud, and the people deserve to hear it.
Now, Sergeant Barry has again been with the department for 8 years. Tonight, he has been placed on modified leave, stripped of his badge and gun. Now, coming up later on Eyewitness News, what one expert has to say about Sergeant Barry's use of deadly force.
So the police were called to her apartment by a neighbor, and she was mentally ill. She was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and the police, who have a history of coming to her apartment, already knew. And of course, there's supposed to be certain protocols when it comes to mentally ill situations. Now, the NYPD say when they got there, she had a pair of scissors in her hand. Now, as one of the cops were talking to her, Officer Hugh Barry came in and interfered, and she ran into her bedroom. Now, Officer Hugh Barry says he was able to talk her into putting the scissors down. But as he started to approach her, she grabbed a bat. That's when Officer Hugh Barry says he felt threatened for his life and was forced to shoot her twice, killing her. Now, in this particular case, the police chief James O'Neill and the mayor Bill de Blasio immediately came out and condemned the police actions, saying that the NYPD failed. And even though he was claiming self-defense, he was still charged with second-degree murder.
An NYPD sergeant charged with murdering a Bronx woman, the deadly shooting, and the war over words in the investigation. Good evening, I'm Dana Tyler. The sergeant says he acted in self-defense when he killed the woman, but prosecutors say he broke the law. CBS 2's Alice Gaynor, live outside the court in the concourse section of the Bronx. Alice?
Dana, a special grand jury indicted Sergeant Hugh Barry after a more than 2-month investigation. The DA argues that Barry did not follow procedure, but Barry's supporters say he was simply protecting himself against a mentally ill, unpredictable person.
We have defendant Hugh Barry, hereby plead not guilty as to all counts.
31-year-old NYPD Sergeant Hugh Barry stood stoically in the courtroom as the charges against him were read. Second-degree murder, first and second-degree manslaughter, and criminally negligent homicide in the fatal shooting of 66-year-old Deborah Danner in her Bronx apartment. Back in October, Barry and other officers responded to a call of an emotionally disturbed person screaming in a hallway. Danner allegedly refused to be evaluated at a hospital. At one point, clutched a pair of scissors, then grabbed a bat. Barry shot Danner 2 times after she allegedly came at him with that bat.
On that day, Sergeant Barry failed to seek critical background information about Ms. Danner's condition or behavior. Sergeant Barry disregarded his training from the New York City Police Department in dealing with emotionally disturbed persons by rushing into Ms. Danner's apartment.
In court, the prosecutor said Barry wasn't following procedure. The grand jury's report said that Barry did not use other options before using deadly force. Namely, the question has been raised, why didn't he use a taser? The president of the Sergeants Benevolent Association, Ed Mullins, defends Barry.
It's called a patrol guide. It's some rules to follow and procedures to try to follow, but it's a guide. It's not a law. And according to law, Sergeant Barry acted according to law.
Within hours of the fatal shooting last fall, the mayor and police commissioner spoke out against the deadly use of force.
Tragic, and it is unacceptable.
We failed.
Mullins says those comments tainted the grand jury pool.
For Commissioner O'Neill to make the comments he made are disgraceful.
Danner's family was not in the courtroom today, but some supporters were there.
So right now, I'm just happy for the small piece of justice.
Barry was released on bail. He'll be back in court on July 7th. If convicted, he faces life in prison.
So despite the police union and all the police representatives getting pissed at the comments the mayor and the police chief made, these police unions are justifying the murder of this 66-year-old mentally ill woman. They claim that this bat-wielding elderly woman caused the police to fear for their life enough to justify her shooting. They even came to his aid with the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund. They have a fund set up so people can donate to help cops pay for their legal funds for when they murder somebody. There's no reason why we can't set up an organization where we can donate to help build our economy. But these police unions even hired a biomedical engineer to conduct a $22,000 study where he asked 3 women about the same size as Deborah to hit a crash test dummy to prove that a bat could cause damage. Now, mind you, he didn't get a 66-year-old woman to swing a bat, but that study was supposed to prove that her having a bat could have fractured his skull, and he had no other choice but to shoot her twice. The problem is, another cop who was an eyewitness, Officer Camilo Rosario, said this woman did not swing a bat. He even testified against him, saying that is not what happened at all.
Sergeant now on trial for the murder of 66-year-old emotionally disturbed woman. Sergeant Hugh Barry says that he was threatened, but prosecutors say he didn't follow protocol when he shot Deborah Danner in her Bronx apartment. CBS 2's Aaron Logan is live now outside the courthouse in the concourse section with more details. Aaron?
Christine, a lot of eyes on this case. When Deborah Danner was first shot and killed, there was a debate over how well officers are trained when dealing with emotionally disturbed people. That question at the forefront today as the trial got underway. A very stoic 32-year-old NYPD Sergeant Hugh Barry sat aside his attorney in court who was anything but.
223-pound person swings that at your head. It's gonna crush your skull.
Defense attorney Andrew Quinn claims Sergeant Barry acted in self-defense when he shot and killed then 66-year-old Deborah Danner, who suffered from schizophrenia. 4 officers and 2 EMTs first responded to a 911 call of an emotionally disturbed person screaming in the hallway of her Bronx apartment in October 2016. After repeated attempts to get Danner to the hospital, she was uncooperative and refused medical attention. Shortly after, Sergeant Barry and another officer officer arrived to the Castle Hill apartment building. They happened to take the elevator with Danner's older sister, Jennifer, her legal guardian. When called to the witness stand, she told the judge she asked the officers to please not break the door down. She had to pay for repairs twice in the past when police couldn't get her sister to let them in.
Sergeant Barry did not ask a single question of Jennifer Danner. Didn't ask about Deborah's history. Didn't ask whether Jennifer could help.
Once at the apartment, Sergeant Barry was able to get Danner to put down a pair of scissors she was armed with. She then picked up a baseball bat and refused to put it down.
Hugh Barry had 8/10 of a second to make a decision and suffer whatever consequences may come, including possibility, very real possibility of death.
Sergeant Barry's presence on scene was supposed to provide calm, experience, and knowledge.
It's a case both Mayor Bill de Blasio and Police Commissioner James O'Neill have expressed major concern over.
It should never have happened. The NYPD's job is to protect life.
We failed.
Still a showing of support for Barry in court. Fellow officers and union representatives, some with hats saying, "We are Barry."
We are happy that we are finally getting our day in court and that the truth will come out.
Friends of Deborah Danner's church groups are also speaking out in hopes that police receive additional training in these cases.
People like her living with mental illness are presenting to the city a new challenge and one we believe we can honor to protect them.
Now the trial is set to resume Thursday at 9:30 a.m. A judge will decide the outcome of this trial, not a jury.
Now, even though this trial is still going on right now, this cop who was fired the same day that he shot this woman, despite him violating policies, despite police officers testifying against him, the police union and all of his affiliates and fellow officers are still out there supporting this cop. They even have hats on that say, "We are Barry."
A New York cop's murder trial now underway for the deadly shooting of an emotionally disturbed woman who attacked him with a bat. Good evening, everyone. It's 6 o'clock. I'm Bill Renner.
And I'm Liz Cho. NYPD officers showed up in force in court today to show their support for a sergeant on trial for murder.
He is Sergeant Hugh Barry, accused of killing Deborah Danner, an emotionally disturbed woman who came at him with a baseball bat.
Well, now a judge has to decide whether it was self-defense or murder. Now, it is News reporter Darla Miles is live in the Melrose section of the Roosevelt Beat story tonight. Darla.
Well, Liz, we learned in court today that Deborah Danner's sister and Sergeant Hugh Barry actually showed up on the scene at the same time. In fact, they rode the same elevator up to the 7th floor and both had the intention of helping Deborah Danner. An argument over a Social Security check with her younger sister may have been what triggered 66-year-old Deborah Danner to become loud and unruly back in October 2016. The reason neighbors called 911 for help that day, the day she was shot by Sergeant Hugh Barry, who was now on trial for second-degree murder and manslaughter.
Some would have you believe that a bat by itself automatically is deadly physical force. We do not agree with that.
But defense attorneys for Sergeant Barry do, and say it's justification for the use of force. On the first day of testimony, Danner's sister Jennifer was asked about the bat the 66-year-old paranoid schizophrenic was known to keep in her 7th floor Castle Hill apartment. Defense attorneys asked, "Did you notice a bat in that apartment?" She answered yes. "Do you know why she had that bat?" "No, I was wondering why she had that bat." Investigators say Danner picked up the bat after she was ordered to drop a pair of scissors. "So when you heard she had scissors, you were alarmed, right?" "Yes, I was very concerned." "Were you concerned for the officers?" "No, I was concerned for my sister."
She was 4 feet away from him, threatening him with a deadly weapon.
Support for Sergeant Barry by fellow officers was unmistakable and equally matched by clergy in support of the mentally ill and civil rights activists who were also in court Tuesday.
Hugh Barry is symbolic of the lack of accountability in the NYPD.
Too many people have been killed in this city who are emotionally disturbed since the death of Deborah Danner.
It's a tragedy on so many levels. She wasn't a criminal, she was sick.
And there were so many supporters in court today on both sides, they had to open up a second courtroom for those people to view the trial. The trial resumed, in fact, on Thursday morning.
Now, this cop officer, Hugh Barry, knows that a lot of the evidence is against him. You have fellow officers testifying against him. So instead of having a jury trial, he elected to have a bench trial with just a judge and no jury. Now we see how quick they are to get out and defend each other, to protect each other, even if it means justifying the shooting of a mentally ill woman. We can never depend on them to punish themselves. Why would they send themselves to prison? They realize if one of the cops get punished, then they all could potentially get punished. But for some reason, if something happens to one of us, we think, well, that can't happen to me until it does. We are Deborah Danner, just like with the murder of Charleena Lyles. She was a mentally ill woman who the police had a history with and knew about, who called the police for help, and they showed up to her apartment and they murdered her. Recently, Seattle Police Chief Carmen Best found that Officer Jason Anderson in fact broke policy because he didn't even have a taser with him. A mentally ill woman is shot to death and your punishment is 2 days suspension. Now, they made sure to say that it didn't determine the outcome of whether she would have still been shot or not, so no one could even think about bringing up criminal charges. Even when they do admit to doing something wrong, they still will not say that it's criminally wrong. They tell you it's a tragedy, but it's nothing we can really do about it. And until we do something about it, then it's going to continue happening. They have no problem hurting our children, hurting our elderly, hurting our women. And they will support each other and defend each other to justify it. So until we start responding with that urgency and put aside our tribalism to do the things that we actually agree on, like protecting our children, protecting our elderly, building an economic base so that we can protect ourselves, then this same cycle will continue to happen. And we'll still be marching another 50 or 100 years from now.
Tonight in the deadly police shooting of a mentally ill woman in the Bronx, the police commissioner taking more criticism as he insists the NYPD failed. CBS 2 political reporter Marsha Kramer has more.
Police Commissioner James O'Neill is refusing to back down in his assessment of what cost the life of Deborah Danner, a 66-year-old emotionally disturbed Bronx woman. Right after she died, he said the NYPD failed, that proper procedures weren't followed. And now, 48 hours later, he's sticking to his guns.
As I said before, we were called to that apartment to help someone, and we ended up killing her. To me, that's an agency failure. And every police officer knows when they use deadly physical force that they're accountable for that.
The commissioner's words drawing a strong response from the union.
I'm not surprised. He is a newly appointed commissioner. He's working for a mayor who has an anti-police perspective of the world. What I am surprised at is how quickly the mayor neutered this commissioner in less than a month. Everything has just changed from this cop's cop that he was known as to now being the neutered little puppy of the mayor.
An unusual ally emerging in this tug of war. Civil rights attorney Norman Siegel, who normally finds himself filing suits against cops or seeking police reforms, is taking issue with the decision to immediately pull the cop's gun and badge. You can't hang someone and then have a trial, he said. Cops have civil rights too. Mayor de Blasio was asked about it today on his radio show.
The public had a right to know that this shouldn't have happened, and it was the right thing to do.
Commissioner O'Neill again raising questions about why the sergeant didn't use a non-lethal weapon to stop Danner, his taser. He said the NYPD now has over 1,700 tasers, 12 for each precinct.
At Middle School 118 in East Tremont, the Bronx, a notice about Black History Month is the first thing you see inside the door. But this year's commemoration is marred by controversy.
Take your feet and step on the kid's back. That's a sign of disrespect, racism, and everything else.
The controversy first reported in the New York Daily News. Students claim 7th grade social studies teacher Tricia Cummings told several black children to lie on the floor during a lesson about the slave trade and the cruel conditions aboard slave ships. When one girl laughed uncomfortably, Cummings allegedly stepped on her back, saying, "See how it feels to be a slave."
I'm all for students learning, but there should be boundaries, and there's certain things that just shouldn't be done.
She should be reprimanded, not let go, because I heard she was a great teacher. But when you do wrong things, it always backfires, so she should have thought about it before she did it.
Chancellor Farina told me Cummings has been temporarily reassigned away from students.
I don't want to make any suppositions. It's under investigation. It's a very serious allegation, and she was removed, and I think at this point we have to wait for the investigation.
Several students who had the teacher told me they liked her very much.
She was a great teacher. I was surprised when they told me this happened, but I don't actually believe she'll do something like that.
Students went home Friday with this letter from the principal, who promises to work with teachers on best practices for covering sensitive material such as slavery. In East Tremont, Tony Aiello, CBS 2 News.
And we emailed the teacher for comment, but she has yet to respond. On her website, meantime, she says her goal is to create a caring, safe, and fair-minded classroom environment.
A student at James Island Charter High School speaking out about a Snapchat photo that school officials say, quote, whether intentional or not, it offended many people.
And Snapchat, as you may or may not know, is a popular social media app used to share photos and videos with followers. Popular because the images disappear after a while, but sometimes that's just long enough for others to see those images and share.
Our Alexis Simmons joins us now live in the control room. You've been working on this story all day long. You talked with a student about that photo. What did he have to say?
Yeah, Lisa and Raphael, a senior at James Island Charter High School, Rick Wilson, tells us it's not the picture itself, but the caption with the picture that offended a lot of people at the school. Now, this photo shows two students wearing spa face masks. Now, one mask is white, the other mask is brown. The caption on the original photo says, "Happy MLK weekend." Now, James Island Charter High School administration made a statement saying, in part, the post does not reflect the values and beliefs of the school. It also says the school has addressed the students involved and is now a discipline issue. Now, Rick Wilson also shared the Snapchat photo on social media with the caption, "It's crazy how racism still goes around in 2018. Share and make this viral."
It was going around a lot, and I saw it, and I was like, well, at first when I saw it, I was like, well, he just got face masks, until I clicked it, and I looked and I saw, and it was like, "Happy Martin Luther King weekend." I was like, well, that has to have a hidden meaning behind it.
And the girls issued an apology on their school's new show that was posted on YouTube. Now, one girl says they were having a spa night at home and there were no conscious thoughts to make a reference to MLK Day. The other student said in part that she made a dumb decision and that she is so disappointed in herself. They go on to say that they don't stand for anything of that nature. And I spoke with the mother of one of the girls in the photo over the phone tonight. She told me she filed a police report for cyberbullying against the student for posting the Snapchat photo on Facebook. Now, Rick says he wants the photo to be taken seriously by school officials.
We're going to start here with the angry reaction this morning after the latest twist in the case of former NFL player Joe McKnight. We want you to look at this flood of tweets from people in the pro football community. McKnight was shot and killed in an apparent road rage incident in Louisiana. And the next day, the police decided to release the shooter. They have not charged him. We're now learning that the same man was involved in yet another road rage incident in the same location. ABC's Eva Pilgrim is in Gretna, Louisiana for us this morning. Hi, Eva.
Good morning. 10 years ago, according to court documents, Ronald Glasser was accused of beating up a man at this gas station in an apparent road rage incident. Then this week, at this stoplight, he admits to shooting a man.
This morning, new details about the man who police say admits to shooting a former NFL running back during what authorities are calling a road rage incident.
We definitely need answers.
Why was he released? They have usurped and corrupted the criminal justice system.
Investigators say Ronald Gasser, seen here in cuffs, shot 28-year-old Joe McKnight 3 times. The Jefferson Parish coroner telling ABC News the former USC standout who played for the Jets was hit in the hand, shoulder, and chest.
Mr. Gasser admitted to shooting Joe McKnight Jr.
McKnight's family and supporters in the community outraged his killer was released from custody and has not been charged.
I want answers. I want the truth to come out.
It's not a white or black thing. It's a right or wrong thing.
According to records released by the Sheriff's Department overnight, Gasser was arrested for a violent fight during a road rage incident in 2006 at a gas station at the same intersection where he allegedly shot and killed McKnight. Charges from the 2006 incident were later dropped. On Thursday, investigators say witnesses reported seeing the two men arguing. The sheriff telling ABC News McKnight was not armed when Gasser fired those shots from his car.
Mr. Gasser did not stand over Mr. McKnight and fire shots into him.
Still, the sheriff says charging Gasser before a thorough investigation is completed would be a rush to judgment. McKnight's family overcome with emotion.
It was like I lost a friend, I lost my everything.
The sheriff saying this case is very personal for his department. The man who raised McKnight was a sheriff's deputy.
This Kansas state lawmaker was in this town meeting arguing about whether or not to legalize marijuana, okay? And one of his reasons for being against the legalization was this. Listen carefully, the tape's not great.
What you really need to do is go back in the 30s and where they outlawed all type of drugs in Kansas across the United States. What was the reason why they did that? One of the reasons why, I hate to say it, it's the African Americans. They were basically users, and they basically responded the worst of those drugs just because their character makeup, their genetics and that.
That is Republican State Representative Steve Alford in a public meeting. And yes, he just said African Americans had the worst response to marijuana as a function of their character and makeup. He then issued a statement saying he was wrong, and sincerely apologized to anyone he hurt. Why do we play this? Because racism and ignorant thoughts about race don't always exist in the loudness of the KKK or people carrying banners and saying things that are obnoxious and voluble. It's often quiet moments and people who believe things that feed a very corrosive sense of fairness and of humanity. That's what this is. I'm not saying that this is a bad guy. I'm saying that he believed this to be true.
Clearly.
And it is poppycock.
All right, and we back on the forecast. And I want to say RIP to Anthony Weber and Deborah Danner. RIP to George Stinney Jr. and Charleena Lyles. And it's the same old story. They have no problem harming our children. George Stinney Jr. was murdered in 1954 with no witnesses, no evidence. Anthony Weber was murdered the other day right after the Super Bowl with no evidence and witnesses that contradict the police story. They were two black boys who was criminalized in a history of black men and boys who have been criminalized. Deborah Danner and Charleena Lyles, two mentally ill women that called the police for help and was shot down in their own homes by two grown-ass men who are supposed to be trained police officers. And it doesn't matter if you're an elder or a child. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. They do not care. They respond with more urgency to a threat that you may have done something than we do when we actually know that they did do something. And until that changes, we'll still be subject to their laws and their punishment. And they will not be subjected to our laws or our punishment if they harm one of us. At some point, our lives have to be more important than our tribal differences, or else we're stuck in this position. So, as always, man, we have got to start standing for something, or we're going to keep falling for anything.